All right, guys, welcome back to your Visiting College Football Podcast. Dalton and Nick here. We're doing our preview and prediction for a CFP First round game between Notre Dame and Indiana. Irish are 7.5-point favorites. 50.5 is the total. 8 p.m. Eastern time on ABC. Notre Dame Stadium in South Bend is the host of this site. Looking at the Indiana offense, this is a group that all year long has been pretty good, led by an abundance of transfers, and it starts with Curtis Rourke. This is a veteran, 5-6 years or whatever under his belt. This is a guy who's played a lot of football. He's had a really great year, 70% comp rate, over 2,800 passing yards, 27 touchdowns, and only 4 picks. And of course, he has a phenomenal receiving group, and I think guys like Elijah Surratt and Omar Cooper are immensely talented. They both have 570-plus yards, combined 12 touchdowns. Pretty deep here. They have 2 other 400-yard receivers, Miles Price and Keyshawn Williams. Also have Miles Cross. A lot of experience here in this passing game, Nick. And of course, we refer to the one game that they played against Ohio State where they weren't all that good. They only had 8 completions on 18 attempts for 68 yards. Outside of that first drive, they really were not able to manufacture much through the air. That was an elite defense they saw. They're facing a good one here against Notre Dame. But the man coverage for the Irish didn't look all that stout against USC. And this group here has more camaraderie. They've been playing all year together compared to a USC quarterback only making a third start of the year. And this is a group that's played a lot of football, Nick, not just together this year, but in the past. I think this might be an underrated matchup that people are not looking at that is very winnable for Indiana.
I think it is certainly a winnable matchup for Indiana when you look at it based on paper between this battle of this passing attack against the secondary. First off, I want to say congratulations to Curt Cignetti and Indiana for getting the job done and getting the college football playoff in year one. Quite the turnaround. I don't think a lot of people would have expected that. You and I were both pretty high on this Indiana team, but to suggest making the playoffs in year one was kind of a crazy suggestion. They were pretty long odds when this all kicked off in August, but they've put together a phenomenal season. They played really good football, and they've been rewarded with an opportunity to play in-state against Notre Dame. Very rare to see a match between these schools in-state as well, so that's really cool and unique. I think it's a very exciting factor. That's a part of the reason why the ticket for this game is one of the most expensive tickets of the playoffs so far. Very expensive ticket, hot ticket to get. Notre Dame, they wanted to play first. They got their game on Friday night. They were begging to play Friday night first. Also kind of weird to see a Notre Dame home game not on NBC. Very unique, part of the playoff era. No more NBC home games. Television. I wondered how that would work, and they got the home game on ABC. Kind of unique, a little bit of an oddity. When you look at Curtis Rourke, though, right, this is a guy that's incredibly talented. This is a quarterback that's been around for a couple of years, and he was really solid at Ohio, a guy that knew how to play football well, knew how to manage the field, was consistent in that offense, but he elevated to the next level at Indiana, has looked really comfortable and confident. 70% comp rate, 2,800 yards passing, 27 touchdowns with 4 picks. Very, very solid, really good down the field. Very accurate with that 70% comp rate, a 1.4% interception rate, so a really nice number there. When you look at a 9.4% TD rate, which is also a really strong number, nearly a 10% touchdown rate, is a really solid return for him. He's been really solid. He's been really good when fully healthy this year. Had some issues early on that took him out just for a little bit, but he's been playing really good football, really confident, and he's a quarterback that's a star player in this offense. Yes, they struggled against Ohio State, but I think they will fare much better against Notre Dame in the passing attack, and it really starts with the passing attack that leads the way for this offense.
And the biggest reason why they were so bad in that game is the offensive line was just getting overwhelmed. The pressure consistently was getting to Rourke, and of course his confidence just started to dwindle after that. They were down big in the game, so it really didn't matter at that point. I was shocked by the lack of adjustments, Nick, the counter set that, because they knew what Ohio State was going to do on third downs. They were going to blitz you, and even with 4, they could get home. 0 adjustments, though, to try and offset that. They didn't try to roll them out at all. They didn't try the chip block. Absolutely nothing, really. And this O-line, they've been good this year. Carter Smith, the left tackle, has been a great player for them. Left guard Drew Evans, for the most part, has been a great pass blocker. At center, Mike Caddick, this is a veteran as well. It's having a very good year. Right guard, Bray Lynch, probably going to be the weakest point for them. And then Trey Wittig's having a great year at right tackle. The 2 best D-lines they faced are borderline elite, Ohio State and Michigan. This offensive line got absolutely smoked in those games, Nick. Nebraska is probably the third best D-line they've saw this year, and they put on a clinic against them. This offensive line has been pretty consistent this year, but against those 2 tough opponents, Nick, they were not very good, and this Irish front is no slouch either. It's right up there in that top-tier category, so the game plan's got to be a little different. We can't just leave these guys one-on-one consistently. We got to mix up the play calling to try and slow them down as much as we can.
Certainly can't leave them one-on-one in this matchup. I think that would be a bad thing to do. I think Cignetti knows that. They're going to scheme up a better game plan here. I think you have to, right? There was no in-game adjustments against Ohio State, lack there as well against Michigan, and that was a serious problem in those 2 matchups. You got to be strong here in the offensive line. I think you really do worry about some parts of that interior. I think I worry a lot about right guard Bray Lynch. I think he's someone that's concerning me in this matchup. He could certainly be isolated and attacked here. They got to be strong. This offensive line has to stand up, give Rourke time to throw. If they don't have a good day here, it's going to really be over very quickly. They got to be strong in the first half throughout the entirety of the game. Got to show themselves some good focus on that offensive line.
It is important to note, I alluded to Drew Evans. He was the starting left guard until he got hurt, and he's out for the year. His replacement, Tyler Stevens, his first 2 starts came against Michigan and Ohio State, and he played pretty poorly. So now that he has some more experience, potentially he will be better in this contest and not be a horrible weakness for this offense. But, that's a big loss right there for that offensive line. Looking at the rushing attack, though, this is a good group. Justice Ellison, Tyson Lawton, incredibly deep backfield. Those are going to be the top 2 guys. Combined 22 touchdowns between them. They, both get about 10-plus carries per contest. So these are pretty fresh runners. They shockingly ran the ball quite well against Ohio State. Had some sack yardage that really brought that total down a good bit. But Lawton had a pretty solid afternoon, 15 carries for 79 yards. So the offensive line proved they can generate some push against the ground attack. It's going to be hard to do that here against the Irish, Nick, but if they can run the ball well like they've done throughout the year in conference play, I think they'll have a good shot of winning this game. Because, again, I think the man coverage is something that they can take advantage of. What do you think this rushing attack will accomplish in this game? Because I think that they'll be, respectable. They're going to overwhelm them, probably not. But they've shown flashes this year, and I think they can do some damage.
This is a pretty good Irish run defense that they're battling against here, about 140 yards per game. They're giving up on the ground about 3.7 yards per carry. This rushing attack for Indiana's got to be strong in this game. They have to have a good day. They're having a solid year of 173 yards per game on the ground, 4.5 yards per carry, 3.1 touchdowns per game. They're really effective in the red zone. Justice Ellison has been a great lead back for this team, 8-11 for him, 5.5 and 10 scores. While Tyshawn Lawton has been really good in the red zone, 634 and 12 scores for him, 4.8 yards per carry. He's more of your red zone back. Elijah Green was playing well for this team as well at points in the season with 5 touchdowns, and Keelan Black has been an okay number 3 back with 2 touchdowns and 251 on limited carries, 5.5 yards per attempt for him. I do like this backfield depth. I think this is a unit that's got some solid pieces here, led by Ellison and Lawton that are really solid, good 1-2 punch there. Lawton a really solid red zone back that complements Ellison quite well.
Now we move to a Notre Dame offense that's been the script for them all year. Is really just to pound the rock and throw it when they need to. Only about 25 attempts per game for Riley Leonard. This has been an efficient passing attack. 77% over the last 2 games for Leonard, throwing the ball 148 yards and 155 respectively. He had 2 200-yard games before that. This is a passing attack. They don't have to do too much, Nick. They just have to be stable. I think throughout the year that's what they've been able to do. This is a deep wide receiver group. You haven't really been able to see that in terms of production because that's just not the style of offense this year. But Bo Collins has been terrific. He's the leading pass catcher. Jaden Grayhouse, Jaden Harrison, Jordan Fajon, these are all guys who have made impact plays at times this year. Chris Mitchell's a talented guy that only has 190 yards. And then Jane Thomas is 8th in receiving. But all of these guys are capable performers, Nick, and against maybe some more sluggish secondaries, they could really tee off. And you kind of see that against Army, where they had no issues throwing the football. Riley Leonard, though, 174 yards per game, 16 touchdowns, 5 picks. We'll talk about what you can do on the ground here in just a minute, but just focus on the passing game, Nick. This is a pretty good secondary they're going to be facing here. I think Mike Denbrock, he's just a great schemer, and I think he's going to be able to find ways to get these guys open. They're not going to be in too much hell in terms of being able to get open and whatnot. So as long as they're stable, we can have clean pockets and drop back and throw accurate passes with timing and chemistry like they've done all year. This passing attack will do solid. I'd say about 200 yards and 2 touchdowns will be the ceiling for you, but that's all they need. That's not a lot to ask for.
I think it's not a lot to ask for this passing attack that is reliable and gets the job done. They don't have to do a whole lot. 196 yards passing per game, 1.6 touchdowns per game. Riley Leonard himself has a 66% comp rate right now, but obviously that's being brought down by some poor performances early in the year. As the years got on, he's got more accurate, more comfortable and confident in the pocket. That is 2,100 yards passing, nearly 16 touchdowns to 5 picks. I think those are all fine stats. I'm not really too worried about the passing attack for this team. They really like to run the ball with a lot of different weapons they have. The passing is complementary at best to the running attack, and I think it's a solid unit that's able to get the job done. Bo Collins has been good as the number 1 receiver, not having incredible stats per se, but he is a really good presence that you see on the field. 427, 12.6, and 2 scores for him. Mitchell Evans, the tight end, has been really good for this team. 272, 9.4, and 3 scores. A good red zone target. Jaden Greathouse and Jaden Harrison have a couple targets each for them. They each got one touchdown grab, about 200 to 300 yards for each of them, depending on which receiver you're talking about. I don't think they have to throw the ball a whole lot here. I think they can run the ball and attack Indiana on the ground and have success there. That's the key to success. It's going to be cold in South Bend, certainly, so it'll play a factor into it as well. I think if you're going to win this game for Notre Dame, you're going to run the ball, and that's really what they got to do with this stellar rushing attack we're going to talk about in a second.
Yeah, this is the most efficient and effective ground game in the country. And these guys are phenomenal. They have 40 touchdowns. It's fifth in FBS. They put up 225 yards per game. Great efficiency. 6.3 yards per carry. The only games they really struggled in this year were NIU and Louisville. And those are also the two games that correlates to the fewest rushing attempts they had all year. So 10 more attempts, I'm sure they would have certainly been a lot better in terms of productivity, where they're held to under 130 yards in both those games. They've not been phased this year, though. Against USC, a much improved defense, they torched them for 258, 273 against Army, which we knew that was going to happen. About 10 yards per carry in that game with a big size discrepancy. Had 4.3 yards per attempt against Georgia Tech, and they also had 200 yards in the opener against Texas A&M. Starts with Jeremiah Love, 949 and 15 touchdowns. This guy's great, and he produces early on in the game. They get these big leads, and they pull him out of there, Nick. He hasn't had 20 attempts in a single game this year. That's important, keeping these guys fresh for the playoffs. Jadarian Price, 7.3 yards per attempt, 7 touchdowns. He also barely gets 10 touches in a game, only 3 times this year as he hit double figures, and he's been highly effective in all those contests. And then, of course, you have Riley Leonard, a guy who's not just good on the read option, but a guy they're going to call a lot of QB powers for. A lot of red zone opportunities for him, 721 and 14 touchdowns. This is an impressive ground attack, Nick, and they're also getting Anais Williams, a freshman, involved a little bit as well. They've not been fazed by anybody. I know Indiana's pretty stellar against the run. We'll get to them, but they've not been slowed down by anybody, Nick. This is such an impressive group, and Leonard's attributes are a big reason why they're allowed to have such a free-flowing ground game.
They have not been fazed by anyone. This is a unit that's incredible on the ground. 224 rushing yards per game, 6.3 yards per attempt, 3.3 touchdowns per game. Just incredible numbers there. Very effective. They know how to run the ball, and that's a big key success for this rushing attack. 10th in the nation in rushing this season. A really good, effective number, and it's got a deep unit with a bunch of different pieces that complement this offense. You talked about Jeremiah Love, who's been really good for this team. Nearly 1,000 yards rushing, 7.1 yards per carry, 15 scores for him, about 80 yards per game. Really impressive numbers. He also has 22 grabs out of the backfield, including 2 touchdowns, so he's a weapon in that regard as well. Riley Leonard, 721, 5.8, and 14 scores for him. Really good in the RPO game, really good in the read option game. A guy that you really like to have in your offense. Jadarian Price has been really good as well. 651 rushing yards, 7.3 yards per attempt, and 7 scores for him. I mean, just having 2 running backs with nearly 100, with one over 100 attempts and one nearly 100 attempts. Both over 7 yards per attempt is a really impressive number. That's really fascinating to see. And Anais Williams, who's been involved as of late, 174 yards for him, 6.7 yards per carry, and 2 scores. This is a very well-rounded room, a really great unit with 4 really solid runners here that you can get involved at various points in the offense. The key to success here, they're going to run the ball. They're going to continue to do that against this Indiana running defense. Can they win that battle? I think they can. This is a very strong unit. It's not been slowed down at all this year, really.
Look at an offensive line that continues to find its stride as the seasons went on. Anthony Knapp, left tackle, was a third-string freshman on the roster, being forced into action due to injuries. And he was abysmal early on in the year. Down the stretch, though, he's been much improved. And he's got 4 sacks allowed, and the team's only been credited with 6 sacks allowed from its offensive line. And he hasn't allowed one since the Stanford game, which was half a season ago. So they're really hitting their stride at the best time. Pass protection is going to be ideal for them. Sam Pendleton, Billy Schrafe will share that left guard spot. Center's going to be Pat Coogan, a veteran who's been great this year. Rocco Spindler at right guard's also been phenomenal. You have Emil Wagner, a right tackle, who's not really been phased all that much. Struggles at times in pass protection. This is an offensive line, though, and they're incredibly physical, Nick. They're playing their best ball week after week, it seems. Knapp at left tackle still can be vulnerable at times. We got to be encouraged with where he's at, considering he was just supposed to redshirt this year and probably not play at all. Now he's a starter in the college football playoffs. He's got a tough matchup against Kamara. It's going to be tough, but I don't think they're going to be putting too many opportunities for any weaknesses their tackles might have in pass protection, because they're not going to be in drop back too much. These guys do their job in run blocking, and that's going to be the key to success.
These guys do their job run blocking. I expect them to do so. Obviously, having a true freshman starting at left tackle in the college football playoff is certainly not what you want to have happen considering injuries, but I think they've stood up well so far this season. I think this offensive line is a really good unit, and I expect them to have a good day here. They've shown me that they can cope with the injuries. They can adapt and continue to play really good football. I think they will continue to do that.
Now we move to a Indiana defense, a group that I thought would hold them back this year, and that's why I wasn't super excited to pick them to accomplish a whole lot, even though the offense had a lot of intriguing pieces. It's because I didn't think they would gel together that fast, and they proved me wrong. They've been great, giving up under 15 points per game this year. When they played Ohio State, held them to only 115 rushing, and they gave up 2 scores. But for the most part, this has been an elite run defense in college football. I know they haven't faced the toughest of matchups throughout the year, but 70.8 yards per game on the ground is highly impressive. And you watch these guys on tape, they're no joke. Mikael Kamara off the edge, the James Madison transfer, he's elite. He's a great pass rusher, phenomenal run defender. He's been highly productive this year and his entire career. 15 TFL, also has 10 sacks. I mean, this guy is a force of nature. James Carpenter, a veteran defensive lineman on the interior, has been really good. CJ West has been very impressive, a phenomenal run defender. More of an inefficient tackler, though. Certainly has some issues there, as does Carpenter. So you got to be sound in tackling, trying to bring these guys to the ground on the interior. Marcus Burris, Tyreek Tucker, these guys will also get involved. Pass rush isn't all that deep, Nick. It's really just Kamara getting after it, and the guys on the interior do their job. He also has 5 sacks. It's really just 2 guys that get after it. But for the most part, this is a team that's been very impressive. When they played Ohio State, they fared quite well. Obviously, that's a very beat-up offensive line they face, but the respect is noted regardless.
This is certainly a decent defensive line that has a solid 1-2 punch in Kamara and Carpenter, who are really good players for this defense. Kamara, 44 total tackles, 15 tackles for loss, 10 sacks for him. Really good numbers there. Also has a pass breakup. Solid player on the defensive line. James Carpenter's been really good as well. 31 total tackles, 10 tackles for loss, 5 sacks for him. Really solid and impressed what he's been able to do. CJ West, 34 total tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. While Tyreek Tucker has been okay with 24 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks. And Marcus Burris has been okay at times as well. 14 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and a sack. Good unit overall. I like what I've seen here.
You look at the middle of this defense, 2 more JMU transfers, Aiden Fisher, Jalen Walker, veteran linebackers. They've been both great against the run this year. They've been efficient players in coverage. Maybe a little bit more shaky, especially Fisher. Maybe it's a guy that can be targeted. Matchups with Mitchell Evans might not be ideal for him. Maybe they'll look to have Walker, be on most of those. Just check downs to running backs or something you got to be wary of. Tackling and having good eye discipline, I think, is going to be key in this game because there's a lot of moving parts to this rushing attack. But sometimes I like to just run it downhill right at you, Nick. So the linebackers, they got to be not just tough in the interior, but they got to be disciplined in being able to make plays out on the boundary, especially if there's an extra blocker when Leonard decides to run. So there's some big responsibilities here for these linebackers that were at JMU last year, and now they're in the CFP.
Yeah, it's certainly a big jump going from JMU to the CFP. But this linebacking core, Walker and Fisher have done a really good job leading the way for this team. These are both 2 guys that I've been very impressed with. Fisher, 108 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks. Walker, 72 total tackles, 9 tackles for loss, 2 sacks there, plus 2 picks. 8 pass breakups for Walker. He's really good in coverage. Fisher, 4 pass breakups. These guys are really solid. They've played well. They've adjusted to the jump to the Big Ten very well this year. And I like the 2 leaders they have in the middle there.
You look at a secondary. They had a lot of additions in the portal this year, and these guys are coming together very well. The Nebraska game is a good example of how dominant they can really be. Weren't really all that fazed by the Ohio State passing attack, even though the Buckeyes were pretty efficient that day, and they probably could have did more damage, if they felt like they wanted to. But for the most part, this is a group that's really earned its stripes this year. You look at corner, Jameer Johnson, probably going to be a guy that gets targeted a little bit more. But D'Angelo Pons, this is a phenomenal player. JMU transfer, of course. The JMU guys have all been stellar for this defense. The up in competition has not been a problem at all for them. Very impressive stuff there. There's going to be your main 2 corners. Jamari Sharp will get on the field occasionally, but it's really just the 2 starters that play the whole game. Amari Farrell, a highly talented player. He was a 4-star out of the state of Florida. He was one of the only guys that opted to stay on this roster from last year's group. Him and Terry Jones in the back end have been terrific. Jones is the number 2 slot corner, while Farrell will play a lot of safety. He'll be in the box a good bit. And then Sean Osbury, him and Jones are both Old Dominion transfers. Osbury's been pretty good, pretty consistent player. That has missed 15 tackles this year, but he's been a reliable run defender. Hasn't been abysmal in coverage. Good secondary here, Nick. Farrell has 4 interceptions, 14 for the team. Good group here. I don't think they're going to be all that bad, but again, we're going to harp on it when it comes to defending this attack. You got to be good with your discipline and your eyes and just being able to tackle. I don't think they'll be all that bad in coverage, but play action is going to be, something that gets hammered a couple of times throughout the game. They got to be good in that area.
They have to be good against play action. I think this is a secondary that can be good against play action. Ashbury's been really good for this team. 62 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks for him. 1 interception as well. Decent numbers there. 3 pass breakups. D'Angelo Pons, I've been really impressed with him. 53 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss. 2 picks and a 9 pass breakups for him. He's a really solid coverage asset. Mar Farrell's been really good for his team as well. 42 total tackles, 4 interceptions for him, 2 tackles for loss. Jameer Johnson, I like what I've seen out of him at times. 34 total tackles and a pick for him. Some other decent pieces. Bryson Bond's been okay. Jamari Sharp's been solid for this team at times. Bonds has an interception this year. Like this unit, this is a good unit. They won't be attacked a whole lot, but you have to be confident, be on your feet at all times, be focused, because they can really hit you with that RPO if you're caught lacking, and Notre Dame can punish you.
Now we move to the Notre Dame defense. This is a run defense that's been dominant all season long. Of course, they're going to face a nice 1-2 punch in Ellison and Lawton. But they haven't really been taking advantage of it much this year. They faced Georgia Tech. It's probably one of the best rushing attacks they'll see. Held down to only 64 yards. I know Haynes King didn't play that game, but still noted how good they can be. Against Texas A&M, a completely different team than what we have now. Because Marcel Reed, of course, wasn't playing that game. Held down to under 150 though. Army, 207 yards on 58 attempts. They dominated in that matchup. And then USC, they're able to rip off some big runs. That's just a tough scheme to defend overall. But I think the biggest question is physicality here, and that's not an issue for them at all. They're not going to be phased in that regard. It starts with a dominant interior duo. And Riley Mills and Howard Cross, these guys have been having a great season. And, the rest of this defensive line's really rallied around them. Donovan Heinisch, Joshua Burnham, Bryce Young, R.J. Oben, a great defensive end. The rest of this group's kind of complimentary. No one that's really, blowing you out of the water in terms of impressiveness. But those guys on the interior, Nick, they are incredibly dominant, and it's going to be hard to get these guys to crack.
This is a defensive line that's really strong, really good against the run. A productive unit across the board. Riley Mills has been really good for this team. 35 total tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks, leading the team with that number. Donovan Heinisch has been really impressive this year. I've been surprised by him. 31 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks. For him, Howard Cross has been really good. 23 total tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. Bryce Young, R.J. Oben have been okay at times in rotational reps. Really good run blockers. Bryce Young, 16 total tackles. R.J. Oben, 14 total tackles. 2 tackles for loss for Young, 1 for Oben. Gabe Rubio, 14 total tackles. 3 tackles for loss and a sack for him. While Jordan Bethrow has 1 sack and 12 total tackles. A good unit here. They've been really strong against the run. This defense has held up well. Yes, it's a tough test they're facing, but I think they have enough to win that battle.
Howard Cross, of course, did miss the last 3 games. Should be finally healthy, recovering from an ankle sprain. This is a team that doesn't have that great of a pass rush. They do have 30 sacks. 10 and a half of those come from that interior duo that we speak of. And then Heinisch has another 3.5. It's really just the interior D-line that does the heavy lifting. Not too many guys coming off the edge in this Marcus Freeman scheme. But they have a lot of aggression. They can certainly throw a bunch of different looks at you. You look at the linebacking group. They've done a great job progressing this year because outside of Jack Kaiser, there's a lot of youth. Kaiser, of course, the veterans, had an elite year. He's been very good as a tackler, been a very stout run defender. Drake Bowen and Jaden Osbury next to him have also been very stout against the run. Bowen has also only missed 3 tackles alongside Kaiser. So this is a very efficient linebacking group, and they're pretty healthy for the most part, too. None of these guys have played 500 snaps this year because the defense, they're not on the field that much. The style of play is really geared Notre Dame up to be incredibly healthy for this playoff period, Nick. And these guys are going to be ready for the body blows when it's going to be a cold, winter night in South Bend. And with how much aggression, Indiana struggled with up front, you can imagine Notre Dame's going to be blitzing these guys a good bit. That's not something they typically do. There's going to be a variety of different looks they're not going to be prepared for, and these linebackers can make plays.
These linebackers can make plays. I really like what I've seen out of these guys. This is a good unit overall. Each of the 3 linebackers here lead the teams in tackles. Top 3 tacklers are all linebackers. Jack Kaiser, 64 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 1 sack. Leading the team there. Really good player at the top of the ticket for this team. Good tackler, very accurate, really good against the run. Bowen's been solid as well, 54 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and a sack for him, while Ashbury's been really solid as well, 50 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, gets in the backfield a fair amount. Really good unit here. I like what this linebacking core can do.
We moved to the secondary. We talked about the USC game. We said that was intriguing to see how they would do with a man-heavy, coverage attack, versus a passing attack that's been by far the best they've seen all year. They've not faced tough passing attack really at all this season when you go up and down their schedule. And we knew when Benjamin Morrison went out early in the year, you knew it wouldn't be much of an issue in the regular season, but you would probably feel the effects when you got to the playoff. Christian Gray, their top corner, he didn't have a great day against USC. This is a passing attack that's just as dangerous. Him and Leonard Moore, they're going to be the top 2 corners here. And, I think these are good players. They're going to be competitive at least. Jordan Clark, he also kind of struggled in the slot against SC, but for the most part, this is a veteran who's been great in coverage this year. He's been a nice run defender. Things get really juicy here when you move to the safety spot. Xavier Watts, the best in the country, probably at his position. He's elite in coverage. Aiden Schuler and Rod Hurd next to him will rotate in that spot. Hurd's been phenomenal against the run, while Schuler's been better in coverage. So it'll be interesting to monitor that rotation there. Good secondary here, top to bottom, Nick, but I certainly think these corners and man coverage, this is where you're going to feel the loss of Benjamin Morrison, because Indiana, they're going to be looking to get the ball out quickly. They're going to be, a lot of inside routes with, slants, crossers, and whatnot. They're going to have to be good in trying to defend these, because this is a quick pass attack. They like to get the ball out fast. That'll certainly be the game plan if the O-line is going to struggle. So these corners got to be good. I think they'll be better than they were against SC, but there's no promises.
There's no promises, and these corners have to be good. The secondary as a whole has to be good. Xavier Watts leading the way for this team. 49 total tackles, tackle for loss. 5 picks for him, including a pick 6, 9 pass breakups. Really good coverage asset so far this season. Schuler's been really good as well. 39 total tackles for him. 3 interceptions and 3 pass breakups for him. Leonard Moore's been really confident at cornerback. He's a guy I want to keep an eye on. Can they pick on him? Can they attack him? I think he'll have a good day. He's a guy that you want to keep an eye on, though, when you're watching this Notre Dame defense. 35 total tackles, 2 picks for him, 8 pass breakups. Rod Hurd's been good for this team. 29 total tackles, 4 pass breakups. Christian Gray, 26 total tackles, 8 pass breakups for him, 2 picks, decent numbers there. Jordan Clark, 25 total tackles, a pick, and 3 pass breakups. Another good player there. They're going to have to be strong there to make sure they stay focused. This Notre Dame Indiana passing attack that is no joke, and they can certainly hit you over and over again. Can the secondary stand up to the task? I think so.
Yeah, I mean, in-breaking routes, slants, whip routes, stop routes, curls, that type of stuff. That's where you're going to see a lot of Indiana. They have to be able to defend those on a consistent basis and not fall for double moves, because they got guys downfield that can make plays, especially Omar Cooper with his hands. Tail of the tape, the team comparisons. I think top to bottom, big edges for Notre Dame across the board. Wide receiver, I'll give it to the Hoosiers. I don't think the one for the Irish is bad at all, but certainly not as productive due to the style of offenses. Quarterback, I'll call it even, Nick. These are 2 very similar guys, incredible veterans. They both have an incredible skill set. They've been both efficient and productive this year, so I'll show the respect to Rourke that he deserves. Everywhere else, though, there's not many concessions that can be made, Nick. I think defensive line's impressive for IU. Not near the Irish, though. I think they're good in the secondary and at linebacker, but Notre Dame's going to get the edges here pretty clearly.
I think Notre Dame does get a lot of the edges here. I think they're the better team on paper. I think Indiana certainly is in this fight, and they're one of the better underdogs in these first couple matchups here. This is a team that's really strong, but Notre Dame clearly has the advantage on the defensive side of the ball, just a more talented team overall, as well on the offensive line, despite the injuries this year and the running back room. I don't think Notre Dame's going to be beat by really anybody in the country, maybe Georgia Tech, but outside of that, I think this is just a really dominant rushing attack for Notre Dame. I think these tail-of-tape comparisons are very fair.
Now you go to the final thoughts and the prediction for Indiana going on the road as underdogs. Don't have the same silly mistakes you had in Columbus. There were some silly issues that happened throughout that contest. They really let that get away from them when it ideally probably should have been a closer game. If the run D doesn't show up, you have no chance in this game at all. Secondary, you got to be tough in man, blitz, work often. And I think Indiana will have some success throwing the ball. You've seen that against Ohio State early. Went right down the field, and everyone's like, oh, that came to play. And I was like, all right, guys, calm down. This defense will settle in. And they settled in the rest of the game. They didn't allow anything. So I think you'll see a bit of that here. Can they hold this up for 4 quarters throwing the football? I just don't think it's going to be possible. This is too good of a defense for that to happen. I think this offensive line will fold like they have in the other 2 big games. It's pretty impressive what they've been able to do in the trenches this year. But in terms of these big boy games, I don't think they're ready to compete in the trenches just yet. So I think it's going to be a typical Notre Dame game, kind of low scoring early on, and then the body blows will start to add up, and this run game will take over. Leonard will be efficient, and I think 27-14 will be the verdict for me. Indiana's a very good football team, Nick. They deserve to be in the playoffs 100%. They earned it, and I think that at least for a half they're going to be competitive. I think the travel's not too bad on them, so I think they'll be in a pretty good mindset to be able to keep this game close for 4 quarters, but the Irish, they're just going to pull away at the end.
I think the Irish will pull away in this one as well. I think Notre Dame, Indiana, that is, no disrespect to them, they're a phenomenal team, but Notre Dame feels like they're playing with this great energy right now. They've really looked like a different team since the NIU loss. They're 11-1. They've rattled off a bunch of big wins recently. They've been playing really good football, dominant wins over Navy, Florida State, Virginia, and Army, and then yes, it was a little bit closer against USC, but they still got the job done in the end in that matchup on the road, I might add. This game, played at Friday night. Notre Dame, they desperately wanted this, the athletic department. They were pushing to get the first playoff game. They were pushing at prime time. It's going to be cold, about 34, 32 degrees at kickoff. Should be a clear night, but still, it's going to be tough and just be bitterly cold out there. That fan base is going to be excited. Like I said, a bit of an oddity that the game is broadcast on ABC. I'm excited for this one. I think this is one of the more intriguing matchups of the first 4. Probably my favorite matchup on the slate because there's just a lot of really good storylines from both teams. This is a very talented Indiana team and a team that's certainly punching above their weight, but at the end of the day, I think this Notre Dame team has what it takes to get the job done and win this game. I think they're in a really good position with the draw they got in the playoff right now. now. This is a very talented team top to bottom that can run the ball, really gut punch you with the run. I think that's going to be the biggest key to success for them, is if they can continue to run the ball as effectively as they have all year, this team can go on and win a national championship potentially. I think they're in a good spot with this first round matchup. I think it will be close early on, but ultimately Notre Dame will pull away and cover the 7.5 point spread is what I'm getting at the book I'm looking at right now, courtesy of ESPN Bet. I like them to cover that spread, get the job done, and move on to the next round. Very excited for this matchup, the first playoff game played on a college campus. South Bend, Indiana is a pretty good spot to do that.
Georgia awaits the winner of this one in New Orleans. One thing I don't want Notre Dame to get too excited about is that you might potentially be playing a backup quarterback in that game against Georgia, and don't want to look ahead at all, because that's an enticing opportunity that lays ahead. And if you're thinking about that, you might potentially lose this game. So we can't let that get ahead of us, Nick. Freeman's got to keep these guys in the right mental space, and they'll play another great game. I don't think it's going to be a worry at all.
Certainly got to keep the headspace right. I will say I think Gunnar Stockton's a pretty good quarterback, and there might be some success he could have against Notre Dame. Maybe the bright lights would be a little bit tough for him, but he showed a little bit of success in that Texas game. I do think Notre Dame would potentially win that matchup, though, against Georgia if we do get there. I think Indiana could potentially beat Georgia as well if all things go their way, if they win this first matchup here. I like the pathway for both teams in this game, but right now I think Notre Dame's going to be the one that wins this one. I think they'll be able to go on and have good success in this college football playoff.
That's here for today's episode. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.